Mark Zuckerberg was on the Hill yesterday. So Mark Zuckerberg had been called onto the Hill yesterday because of all of the claims that privacy had been violated by Facebook. That if you publicly post information and then that information was scraped by an outside company, meaning that they were using that data in order to market to you or in order to generate voter profiles, for example, by Cambridge Analytica, that this was some sort of terrible, evil crime. Now, I think there are lots of problems with social media. I really do. I've been highly critical of social media many times, and I will be again in just a moment. But if you really think that the big problem on Facebook is that you publicly post information and then companies look at it, you're stupid. Okay, you're dumb. And if you think the big problem on Facebook is that tons of people were being manipulated by fake news, right? If you really think, like Democrats think, that Hillary Clinton would have won except for the 7 ads run by Russian bots in the 2016 election, you crazy. Okay, you're out of your mind. And people are so crazy now that there was a big story that came out, I think it was from NBC News yesterday, about a video that was viewed about 250,000 times that was a supposed sex tape, including Hillary Clinton. Okay, it was fake news, obviously, because number one, who would ever want to see any of that on camera? But number two, is that really, was that shifting votes? Because we're 5 minutes away from Dianne Feinstein calling the head of Pornhub up to the Hill to explain why Hillary Clinton lost since there was a distribution on Pornhub of a fake Hillary Clinton sex tape. Okay, all of this is nonsense. The real problems with social media is that social media are now playing a gatekeeper function they were not meant to play. Social media were supposed to be like your phone line. They were supposed to be a platform. Okay, here's the way that this works. When you pick up the phone and you call somebody, what is said over that phone line is not the responsibility of Verizon or AT&T or Sprint, okay? It is the responsibility of the person on the phone. Facebook was supposed to be more like the phone line. It was just a platform. You put your information up there, you put your news stories up there, people can engage, they cannot engage, it's their free choice. Instead, Facebook has now interposed itself between its own users and information that people want to see. It's been a pet peeve of mine for a long time. They were doing it back in 2016 when they were talking about shifting their algorithm so that certain trending topics were not allowed to trend. Conservative trending topics were not allowed to trend on Facebook. And now, of course, they've shifted their algorithms to supposedly benefit local news and established mainstream media outlets and against alternative news sources like Daily Wire. Right? This is why, if you're watching this show right now and you're wondering where your Daily Wire updates went, you need to go and check out your own settings right now and reset your settings because Facebook has tacitly and without your permission gone and changed the algorithm so that you are not seeing our updates anymore because they say that our news site is somehow not as credible as CNN or the New York Times, which is just absurd. Okay, Facebook right now is even burying which outlets it's punishing. Right, so Facebook is obviously penalizing certain outlets, but it's not explaining what exactly is penalizing. According to the tech website The Outline, conservative and right-wing publishers were hit hardest by the new algorithm change. The engagement numbers of most predominantly liberal publishers remained unaffected. And now Peter Hassan of the Daily Caller is reporting that Facebook does not intend to identify which media outlets it helps and which it hurts, according to a company spokesperson who spoke to the Daily Caller News Foundation. The spokesperson argued that if the company revealed that data, it would not give people a clear picture of Facebook, adding, "We've made changes to newsfeed to help people meaningfully connect with friends and family first. This means public pages of all types are going to experience declines across Facebook. Political pages and partisan news pages, like other public pages, have experienced declines, but there are examples of declines across the political spectrum." Except for the fact that that's not true. Okay, except for the fact that if you look at the mainstream media outlets, they have not lost engagement, right? The only sites that are losing engagement are particularly conservative ones. So all of the senators yesterday were grilling Mark Zuckerberg on the Hill. They're grilling him again today. And first of all, it is important to note, if you're going to have people grill Mark Zuckerberg, they have to have once used a computer. Okay? A lot of these questions look like they were submitted by my 93-year-old grandmother. And it was a bunch of people who are asking Mark Zuckerberg about the questions. Basically, the exchange sounded something like this: Senator Orrin Hatch, who's 8,000 years old, either reading off a piece of paper written by a 23-year-old, or asking questions that have nothing to do with Facebook, or Senator Dick Durbin, who's a complete idiot who probably has never used Facebook, sitting there and saying, "So, Mark Zuckerberg, you have a book full of faces," and then Mark Zuckerberg looking at him in wonderment and bemusement. This is what happens when the average age of the senators who are questioning Mark Zuckerberg is 57 years old. That's not a rip on people who are 57. It is to say that the chances that they are really fluent in social media is pretty low. And that's why you see stupidities like Dick Durbin asking Mark Zuckerberg where he stayed at his hotel last night. This is a thing that actually happened.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, would you be comfortable sharing with us the name of the hotel you stayed in last night?
No.
Okay, and this is one of the things that's so incredibly stupid. So one of the complaints by Democrats has been that if you publicly post information, then people see that information, it's a violation of privacy. Mark Zuckerberg would not have to, under Facebook's rule, reveal where he went to his hotel last night. And so I'm not sure what Dick Durbin is even getting at, but Dick Durbin doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. There were a couple of people who actually went after Zuckerberg on matters that actually do matter. Okay, so there are really a couple of matters that are really serious. One is the amount of political bias at Facebook, the political bias of the people who are actually implementing and writing the algorithms. And the other thing that's really important is whether Facebook is a platform or whether Facebook is a publisher. And that matters because, getting back to our AT&T, Sprint, Verizon discussion, if the phone company starts acting like a censor, if they start buzzing out what you're saying to your friends, they become responsible for what you say to your friends. They're acting like a publisher. Like we at Daily Wire, we edit all of our pieces. We purchase all of our photos from a service called Getty Images so that they're all licensed because we're a publisher and we're responsible for the content we post. If, however, if we use a particular internet service, that internet service is not responsible for the content we post. It's just a platform. Facebook has presented itself as a platform, which means they're not legally responsible for example, misuse of copyrighted content or slander. But if they're responsible for what's being put up, if they're controlling what you see and what you hear, then suddenly they need to be treated like any other news outlet. They need to be treated like NBC or MSNBC or CBS or CNN or the New York Times or the Daily Wire. Right? So those were two separate questions. One was the political bias, and one was the fact that Facebook is playing censor, which would actually subject them to liability. Both of these lines of questioning were engaged in by Republicans, and these were the only two lines of questioning that mattered. So the first line of questioning about the political bias, about Facebook cracking down on conservatives, this was pushed by Senator Ted Cruz from Texas. Full disclosure, when Senator Cruz visited our offices and I interviewed him, we had a pretty substantial discussion about exactly this topic. So good for Senator Cruz for going after Mark Zuckerberg on this. Here's Senator Cruz illuminating the issue for Zuckerberg.
Well, Mr. Zuckerberg, I will say there are a great many Americans who I think are deeply concerned that Facebook and other tech companies are engaged in a pervasive pattern of bias and political censorship. There have been numerous instances with Facebook. In May of 2016, Gizmodo reported that Facebook had purposely and routinely suppressed conservative stories from trending news, including stories about CPAC, including stories about Mitt Romney, including stories about the Lois Lerner IRS scandal, including stories about Glenn Beck. In addition to that, Facebook has initially shut down the Chick-fil-A Appreciation Day page, has blocked a post of a Fox News reporter, has blocked over 24 Catholic pages, and most recently blocked Trump supporters Diamond and Silk's page with 1.2 million Facebook followers after determining their content and brand were, quote, unsafe to the community. To a great many Americans, that appears to be a pervasive pattern of political bias. Do you agree with that assessment?
Zuckerberg would go on to basically say that it is fair to say that Silicon Valley is far left-leaning and that suspicions of political bias are not unwarranted. So he basically admitted that. So that's important. Also, it is important to note, along the same lines, that Zuckerberg, who is now proclaiming that Facebook ought to be the arbiter of what constitutes good speech and bad speech, can't define what good speech and bad speech are. So he was questioned by Ben Sasse about specifically this, and he was asked about defining hate speech because he said, well, let's just get rid of all hate speech. Let's get rid of all the bad speech. And Sasse said, okay, well, it's one thing if you're talking about violent speech, but if you're talking about nonviolent speech, do you even know how to define that? And if you claim that you're a platform, if you claim that you're not a publisher, you're a platform, then how can you define what speech is hateful and which speech is not, given the fact that you have no hard considerations as to what that constitutes? So let's jump into the Trump investigation, because there are some breaking pieces of news with regard to that. So first of all, Alan Dershowitz has come out and he says that targeting Trump's lawyer should worry everybody. So as you recall, back on Monday, President Trump's personal lawyer's office was raided by the FBI. And Alan Dershowitz has a piece over at The Hill about this. He says there's much speculation as to the significance of the search of the offices and hotel room of President Trump's lawyer, Michael Cohen. To obtain a search warrant, prosecutors must demonstrate to a judge they have probable cause to believe the premises to be searched contain evidence of crime. They must also specify the area to be searched, the items to be seized, and in search of computers, the word searches to be used. At least that's the constitutional requirement in theory, especially where the Sixth Amendment right to counsel is involved, in addition to the general Fourth Amendment right against unreasonable searches. But he says that the firewalls and the so-called taint teams, which are supposed to prevent the FBI from looking at documents that they're not supposed to look at, right? That these have experienced troubles in the past. He says it's an imperfect protection of important constitutional rights. He says that's why Justice Department officials must be careful to limit the searching of lawyers' offices to compelling cases involving serious crimes. We don't know at this point what the prosecutors are looking for, but if it relates to payments made to porn star Stormy Daniels, that would not seem to justify so potentially intrusive a search of Cohen's confidential lawyer-client files. So Dershowitz is defending President Trump. He's been defending him on legal grounds for a while here, suggesting that President Trump has been unfairly targeted, which I think in large measure he has. But all of this is leading to a serious crisis inside American government. There's a lot of talk today about whether President Trump is actually going to go ahead and fire Robert Mueller or whether he's going to fire Rod Rosenstein. Those are the two rumors that are on the table. So firing Mueller, by the way, would not stop the investigation into Cohen's office. Recognize that was referred out to the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York. So that's no longer under Robert Mueller's purview. So President Trump could fire Mueller. It would have no impact on that. It would just on the Russian collusion investigation, which by most accounts at this point is turning out to be sort of an empty bag, at least so far as quote unquote getting Trump. There's no evidence at this point that there was serious collusion between the Trump campaign and anyone in the Russian government. The only people who have been indicted for lying to the FBI, people like George Papadopoulos. Carter Page still has not been indicted despite the FISA warrant against him. And so, Trump's drive to fire Mueller, I think, would be misplaced. I think that that's probably a waste of time. Apparently, according to a New York Times piece, the president was so furious after seeing news about subpoenas issued by the special counsel a few months back that he told advisors in no uncertain terms that Mr. Mueller's investigation had to be shut down. This is when Mueller was going after Deutsche Bank. So Trump has repeatedly been considering firing Mueller. He said the other day that he was still considering firing Mueller. Obviously, that is something that he is considering now. Apparently, he's considering firing Rod Rosenstein. Rod Rosenstein is, of course, the guy who oversees Mueller and oversees the rest of the Department of Justice with regard to some of these Trump-related investigations. So CNN was reporting that the president's interest in releasing the deputy attorney general was heightened after the office of his personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, was raided by the FBI. The CNN report noted that such a move could limit special counsel Robert Mueller's quickly escalating investigation into Trump and Russia. But that, of course, would not stop what's going on in the Southern District of New York. Obviously, Trump has been very, very critical of Rod Rosenstein to this point. The investigation, I think, is outside of Trump's capacity to contain it at this point through firings. And I think, frankly, that it would be a mistake for him to issue these firings. If it turns out that these offices come up with nothing, there'll be plenty of people who defend him, myself included. I've been defending him on the Russian collusion stuff for well over a year now. When it comes to the Michael Cohen issue, there are going to be two issues involved. One is, was there any actual criminal activity? And two, does it rise to the level of the impeachable? Right? These are two separate questions, and they're not the same question. Because it is quite possible that the president of the United States was involved in a campaign finance violation. That's possible. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility by any stretch of the imagination. But does that rise to the level of a high crime and misdemeanor subject to impeachment? A little harder to make that case, simply because this was a $130,000 payment that violated campaign finance, and Barack Obama's 2008 election cycle contained $2 million in such campaign violations. Nobody was impeached over that. So unless President Trump, as president of the United States, was actively involved in a conspiracy to cover up a campaign finance violation, then I think that it's going to be hard to claim impeachment, even if it turns out that Michael Cohen is guilty of violating campaign finance laws. So that's the latest in that investigation.